oftentimes leaders are the first to not take care of themselves or manage their mental health, so that it's all bottled up and then they're not able to show up for other people. It's difficult.
Especially when an organization is cutting this.
I would like to think if a leader is in that role, that they have the agency and influence to say, I need this. It comes down to why they're not asking for it.
Welcome to Leadership Rewired. Allison Allen and Dean Martin invite you to join them for an honest conversation that brings a personal perspective to the issues of leadership.
Welcome to the Leadership Rewired podcast, where we talk about the issues that are impacting leaders today. And we focus on all of those things that matter to leaders. Today, we are super excited because we're kicking off something different. We are thinking about series and, given the time that we're in and the social, the economic, the political sort of landscape and how all of that is impacting people, we felt that the first series that we should focus on is wellness and mental health and social connection, not just in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives. I'm Allison Allen, and I am joined today by my co-host, Dean Martin, and we have a special guest, someone that I met. You know how sometimes when you just show up in spaces and you meet people and it's like kismic, I hope that's the right word, where you just feel that a connection matters. I want to introduce our listeners and quite frankly, anyone to Bhavik Shah. And I'm going to have him introduce himself to you because I won't do it justice. And there's such an amazing backstory to him and the work that he does. Bhavik.
Allison, Dean, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited and grateful to be here in the space. Hi, everyone, to you all listening. My name is Bhavik Shah. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a founder and culture change strategist at the intersection of workforce, mental health, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been doing this work for a while, coming up on 17 years in the leadership space. My background is within financial services. Probably not your typical background for people who are doing this work, but if anyone is in finance or has gone through financial services, you know exactly what it takes to thrive in that atmosphere and why now I'm positioning my career into a space to help other leaders navigate burnout, retention, attrition, etc. I think the interesting story that Allison is alluding to, how I founded my company, which is no shockingly named right after myself. It's called Bhavik R. Shah LLC. While some people may think that it's not unique because it's just a very simple name, the reason why I purposely kept that name when I founded the company a couple of years ago is because for many years in financial services, when I was coming up in my career, I felt othered, which is not something surprising for a lot of marginalized communities. We're in spaces where you constantly have to feel that compelling and assimilating in the workforce is the only way to success and to thrive. And I wanted to make sure that my name represented all the uniqueness that people have to offer within their own realms, whether that's personal, professional, or beyond, and ensure that they understand and they're able to leverage my example that their identity is their superpower. So I kept my logo as the Gujarati South Asian translation of my name to ensure that my cultural roots are also represented properly. And I leveraged that through my work with Fortune 500 companies and ensuring that mental health and DEI is supported at the workforce.
Amazing.
And so thank you so much for having me. And thank you for allowing me to give that introduction.
No problem. And I think one of the things that is really important to Dean and I is that, even as part of our mission is like living into the trueness of who we are as human beings first. And, and certainly well-being is part of our mission, which is again, why this is super important. And so I'm just going to turn it over to Dean to introduce our first podcast.
Yeah, for sure. So lovely to have somebody else in the podcast. I love being with Allison, but it's really great to have a guest. Bhavik, wonderful. Welcome.
Thank you.
So really special as well as our first guest in this series around mental health in the workplace. This one, we really want to talk about something in particular, which is about the stigma of mental health, and to ask a question of our leaders who are listening, which is, what if we prioritize mental health to the extent that it actually became your organization's competitive edge, and not just the stigma or something that we're avoiding or something that we just, begrudgingly accept that burnout is just part of the deal, but rather, no, let's look at it differently. Let's rewire it. So today, our podcast is called Breaking the Stigma, Nurturing Mental Health in the Post-Pandemic Workplace. And Barvik, I want to know from you, what are some of the signs that you think a leader should be looking out for? Maybe subtle signs or signs that are just, indicators for them that their teams are struggling with mental health challenges.
Yeah, great question, Dean. I'm thinking for everyone who's listening and even beyond, maybe it's beneficial to define mental health, just to be clear, set that foundation, because a lot of people have misconceptions of what mental health is. So mental health is similar to how physical health is. It's on a spectrum where we experience joy, happiness, fulfillment, and also we feel grief and stress and anxiety. It's how we connect with the world and with our communities. And essentially, it's how we present ourselves every day, how we deal with certain things in our lives, and our emotional, our psychological behavior is all impacted for our mental health. To be clear, mental health is not mental illness. When we talk about mental health, it doesn't mean that we're speaking about someone's diagnoses, such as depression or anxiety or schizophrenia, etc. It is literally how we are taking care of ourselves from a mental perspective, just how we take care of ourselves from a physical perspective. I thought that would be
thank you.
Just to make sure that everyone has that foundation. But
super helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Back to your question, Dean. One thing to recognize here for leaders, especially as they're navigating these waters, is that no two employees are the same. Some employees may be really good about masking some of the mental health challenges that they're facing, and others it becomes very visible. So in order to address any of that, first thing first is that there needs to be a foundation of trust in organizations. Employees must understand that there is a culture of psychological safety, which another term, it's essentially what that means is that there's a freedom of expressing views, thoughts, and opinions without any reprimanding or any backlash in an organization or within any environment, regardless if it's professional or not. So when we think about a culture of psychological safety, if it's present, then people will feel free to address their concerns and, most importantly, advocate for what they need at the workplace. They feel they have the confidence and trust and assurance that they can raise their hand and say, hey, I need help with X. And then understanding that things may change as people progress and people evolve, but that's the most important thing. So as a leader, you can determine how people are going to cope or manage their own mental health. Some, like I said, may be really good at masking some of the challenges. Others may be very visible with, like, if they're stressed out, you can see it, you can feel it, how you engage with them, how they show up in different spaces. Your job as a leader is to have the same support throughout, whether that's a listening ear, or whether that's providing other forms of flexibility or accommodations of what they need at the workforce. What your job isn't is to become a therapist or a clinician or a psychologist, because I'm pretty sure most leaders in the workforce today are not trained for that. If they were, I think they would be in different positions, right? Maybe some are, but you shouldn't still give medical and mental advice on that level.
What do you think, though, just in the spirit of being, I don't know if provocative is the right word, but it's like, most people might hear Dean's question and go, oh, are you kidding me? So now my job is to walk around and look for signs of people who have, mental health issues. Like I got 15,000 things to do. Right. Like, seriously, that's what I have to spend my time doing. Like, what's your reaction to that?
I think I may have an equally provocative answer to that.
Okay, go for it.
It ultimately comes down to, what is your legacy as a leader? What kind of
I love
culture
that.
do you want to build? Because if it is a culture built on micromanagement, just meeting goals and client deadlines and just play hard, or what's the phrase they always say? Work hard, play hard.
Work hard, play hard.
Right?
Yeah.
Like if the culture is just a burnout, or if the culture is, hey, this is just how we have to get things done, regardless of acknowledging people's differences or unique experiences or viewpoints, then don't do this. Don't do this work, because at the end of the day, it will show if you don't care. But if you do care, and I think there are a lot of leaders who don't get enough credit on leading really with empathy and thoughtfulness. If that is your ultimate goal, to create a culture of that nature, then it's coming down to how you show up as a leader, how you showcase vulnerability and create that psychological safety that I was saying. Because if you want to get to an end goal, but you're not taking the right steps, then you're not going to meet your goal.
Right.
Yeah.
It comes down to that question: what is the legacy that you want to leave?
I really love that legacy question, because we talk about, or have talked about in the podcast, around, if the frame of a leader is to get the best out of people so they can do amazing work. If the frame of the leader is to get the best out of people so that, you can help them build amazing careers. If the frame of the leader is to give everything you can to a situation, then you are caring about, whether or not they're doing their best work. You are caring about whether or not they are contributing to the organization. You are caring about, creating that safe space for them so that they can do the best thing that they can. One of the things I was curious about with the question, and you and I were catching up about a month ago, and you just said, gosh, I really thought we would be further along post COVID with mental health. And, I'm with you. Like, I just don't understand why this is still sort of that thing in the corner. And I hope I'm not, offending anybody when I say this, that people only want to deal with when it comes out to play, right? And so, or when it becomes an issue. Like, why don't you think we're further ahead, or we haven't made much progress in this area?
I agree with you, Allison. I think it is unfortunate that we just are not. We haven't learned enough from the pandemic. I think for many people, we all believe that this was going to be a transformative moment in our history, in our workforce. And for a little bit, it felt like it was actually going that way. And now it just feels like a full boomerang. We're back to where things were, pre-pandemic. One of the reasons why I firmly believe that people are not willing to make this into this transformative juncture in their workforces is that it's hard to do this work. It's hard to change your behaviors. And we're talking about leaders like ourselves, but we're also talking about leaders who have maybe 30, 40 years ahead of us as well. And when you think about it from just from a psychological perspective, let's take it back to the roots, it's really hard to change your habits if you've been doing something or you've been leading a certain way for so long.
Yeah.
And now that important crossroad has come up, right? Do we continue to invest into our people and create the sustainable culture? Yes, we've created resources, we've provided training, we've made great marketing slogans on why mental health is important. But to get to that finish line, to get to that point of legacy that we were talking about before, you have to change. That human behavior element is something that I think a lot of leaders are struggling with, to integrate this in a capitalistic structure, because people don't see this as a hand-in-hand strategy. They see all of these workforce benefits, whether it's health, whether it's DEI, whether it's anything else in terms of culture, as a nice to have, right? if we have time, then we can do this. If we can make the budget or create a budget, then we can do this. But you're not seeing the interconnectivity between the two.
One of the things I was reading a little while ago, I read a report, it's probably about 2 years old, Kaiser Permanente, which is a health plan, a healthcare provider. Did some research and found that I think 62% of missed work days in the US could be attributed to mental health conditions. So, I love you, Barvik. This is why you're here. You're talking about a leader's legacy and, what kind of an impact. Right. And that's why Allison and I are here. We care about, the impact that leaders have on their people. But if that's maybe not your burning platform or your deepest heart's desire, or it's like number 9 on your list of motivators, at least look at it from this point of view of that attending to our employees' well-being and their mental health is going to benefit the bottom line.
Yeah. And that's a great point, Dean. There are a couple of ways to think about this, right? In my work, especially recently post-pandemic, and a lot of leaders trying to figure out where to go next. There are those who build off of facts and data. They want the business case. And if there is a business case, then they will pursue this work. And there are a lot of companies who have done great research. For example, the World Health Organization has said something around $12 billion have been wasted from just lost to mental health challenges, and $1 trillion lost in productivity, which is mind-boggling how many zeros come after those numbers. And if folks decided to invest into mental health, leverages data. This is a great business case. There are some leaders who think that's all great and dandy, and they'll have their slogans and their mental health awareness weeks and months and all those events from their angle, but then they're not integrating the work because either they don't care, which is the sad fact. Some don't, right? We have to accept that fact. I think most do, but they just don't know how to integrate it because of their roles. A lot of leaders right now are burnt out. They cannot handle the pressure from meeting targets and client deadlines or deliverables or bringing in sales. So wherever you are in the workforce, in whatever industry, there is that pressure to thrive and continue to be responsible commercially. Because the more senior you get, you have some sort of pathway back to the bottom line, to the revenue generating business side of things, right? They're not able to integrate mentally healthy cultures and mentally healthy behaviors with that bottom line. So it's more of a lack of education, but also a lack of capacity at the same time.
Do you think that, when I was listening to the stat that Dean gave, and then when I heard what you say, I think part of the issue also is for a lot of leaders, that sounds like the World Health Organization's thing, right? Part of the challenge, I think, is that no one inside is tracking this. Right. No one is saying, this many people have been out. Like, we're always looking at attrits. Right. We're always looking for, maybe some internal mobility stats. We're talking about retention. Some people analytics functions will go out and say, oh, this many people have been out and therefore X, Y, Z. But it often ends up being like benefits organizations' problems to track that kind of thing. Do you think there's an opportunity for like the people team to start telling a much better story? Because when you present the World Health Organization stat to a leader, they're like, okay, that's not me. But if you bring that inside and you say, number of people who were out, number of reasons given associated with XYZ, this is costing us XYZ, here's how much money we're losing every year. Let's do better. Now all of a sudden it gets real.
Yeah.
Why aren't HR people telling this story?
It's a great question. There's a couple of things that are coming to mind. One, do they have the mechanisms to even track this data? Like, are you asking your people frequently about their experiences at work, the culture. So engagement surveys have become very popular over the last decade. I know they've been doing them way before that too, but especially now as we're looking to use that data and leverage it for the budget for these type of programs, there are often questions about how are you finding the culture? How is your relationship with your manager? What is your perspective about mental health at the workplace? But are they asking these questions fundamentally at all? Like, do they have engagement surveys instituted in the first place?
And so do they do something about it once they have the data?
Yeah, right. Know? That's the second piece. If you are asking these questions, what are you doing with this data? Unfortunately, I've had also these clients that they just sit on it, which is such a huge waste of everyone's time and money. What a lot of people don't realize, what a lot of leaders don't realize is that, especially for marginalized groups, for people who have been conditioned to operate in a certain way, and I told my story before, and it's unique, but it's not unique, right? Because I know so many people who have gone through similar experiences about assimilation and conforming, that it takes a lot of courage for us to even fill out an anonymous survey, because we are fearful that somehow it's going to come back to us. Maybe there is a smaller team and I'm the only person who works in finance, for example. If I fill out the survey, they will know that I said X, Y, and Z. I've been in boardrooms with high-paid executives, and they looked at the data and they said, "Oh, I know who that is." Just by the wording, the language and terminology. And I shake my head and I just am in awe that they're able to identify someone, but also say it out loud. It's okay if you know who.
Or even to say it. Why would, if you do know, just be quiet.
You have the audacity to say it and to say it is wild to me. So they sit on this data and they don't do anything. So the person, for example, if I'm in a position and I overcome a lot of cultural stigma and individual stigma and fill out the survey, and then they do nothing with it, then I have lost trust in my leadership team. They become uncredible because they're not doing anything with this data. So that's another thing. If they're not doing anything with this data, then that's not going to actually change. But let's say they're doing all of this. You have the survey, you're asking the right questions, then ultimately you have to think about, are your resources currently that you have working properly? They can't be one size fits all. They have to be adaptive, and you have to remain agile with it. Yes. So for example, if you did something 2 years ago and it seemed to be working for a while, the world's changed 10 times over 2 years ago.
100%.
Just look at where we are today. There's so many events happening in the world, and some are heartbreaking to see, others are equally frustrating and anger-inducing. People are impacted by this on a day-to-day basis, so you cannot just stay stagnant.
You're talking about, what's going on geopolitically there, Bhavik. And I'd like to, maybe for us to even think about what might be at the source of somebody's mental health challenges, or just their peaks and troughs. I don't see everybody as just a static of like, oh, that one's got a mental health condition and that one does not. We have good days and bad days and good quarters, etc. But, if one of the things that we are all swimming in the water of, geopolitically, whether it's the presidential elections coming up in the US, or the impact of the war and the humanitarian crisis of Israel and Gaza impacting on us, or the Russian and Ukrainian war, there's geopolitical. Then there's organizational. There may be some things going on for people that they say, and you mentioned it at the start, my workload or the expectation around my sales or my clients, relationships, or, is there transparency from my senior leaders around where our organization is going? That has an impact on me too. And then there's the third piece, which is just personal, just because you're a living, breathing person, and you're in a family, or you're single, or your dating's not going well, or you're worried about money, or your baby's sick, or your husband's a nightmare, or just being alive and commuting. So, all of these three things, and that's in some ways, even that's a false kind of way of compartmentalizing. but somebody shows up at work and they are experiencing something that just is not subjectively nice. It is not good. In particular, I'd love to look at these two areas of, from a personal point of view or an organizational point of view. What can a leader do practically to encourage this culture of openness? Let's say from a personal point of view, somebody's going through a divorce or somebody's just struggling along with the birth of their baby or anything.
Right. Yeah, no, this is exactly what I talk about constantly with my clients. The first thing is, it goes back to what I was saying before at the start of the podcast, the foundation of trust. It needs to start with you and being an active role model. That comes in different forms. It can, one, take a form of being vulnerable about your own mental health, not mental health challenges. You could come in and say, last week was really hard, but I did X, Y, and Z, and this is how I was able to manage it. And that's it. For example, when I was in financial services, I often talked about my mental health because I needed to, one, showcase to my own team that speaking about mental health does not make you incompetent or weak to do your job. It's just simply the human experience. There will be some bad days. You have an argument with your partner or your argument with your family member, and you'll, kind of shift your moods and it impacts you on a day-to-day basis. Or maybe you made a mistake at work and it was a bit careless and you're beating yourself up a little bit, saying, wow, I can't believe I did that. It's just making work human again, which is what we lost, or maybe we never had it in the first place. I'm still debating if the workplace was ever really humane or not. I think there's somewhere gray area.
I think it was.
It was. So I think it was.
I think I'm slightly older than you, and I think I do remember a time when I felt like truly loved by my organization. But I hear what you're saying. Right. I do. Yeah. I really do.
But even that's about perspective, right? If my experience has only been like you're a number and you're just an operation cost to the business, that stays with you, especially in corporate or any corporate world.
100%.
So it goes back to that role model. But let's start there. If you're talking about your own mental health, if you're showcasing vulnerability, also if you're being transparent about your workload, setting those healthy boundaries are all important and ways to showcase to your team that I'm doing this for my own mental health. I want you to be secure enough and psychologically safe enough to do the same. So whether it's a personal thing or whether it is a work-related thing, that you feel empowered to raise your hand or you come to me one-to-one and ask what you need to be successful at work. What I don't want leaders to feel is that they have to diagnose and solutionize.
Right.
In this world, we always are thinking about problem solving. You cannot solve people's mental health challenges or issues. That is not your job, firstly. And secondly, most of you are not qualified to do that. So let's not enter into that murky water. But what you can do is, for example, if it's work related, make sure you have healthy boundaries on your work hours. If it's a holiday weekend, don't call your team about something that's non-urgent. Make sure you're socializing to your clients that these are the values and norms that we practice. What I started doing with my clients is starting to embed a social contract about how I conduct my business. So I will be there with you and, get my elbows dirty and do the work, but there are certain non-negotiables. So after hours, if it's an emergency, then you can call me. And I also explain what an emergency is. Most of the time, 99% of the time, and especially in fields that I work in, which are not medical, it's not an emergency, right? We're not saving lives here. We're not in hospitals or ICUs. These are corporate structures where things can wait maybe another day. So it's really setting up those expectations with clients, and then those leaders can use that and set those same expectations with their people. When it comes to personal things, sometimes you just don't want to get involved. I understand that. But if you see some behavior change, if for example, like let's just take you all, for example, me. If you see me every day and I'm very chipper and I go get my coffee at a certain time and you just know my behavior traits, but then all of a sudden for like 2 weeks, I'm just very silent, then I encourage you to ask like, hey, how are you? Is there anything I can do to support you? I've recognized, you're a bit quieter than most days. Can I help in certain ways? Sometimes they'll say yes and sometimes they'll say no, and that's fine. But just consistently do that, because that's what showcases role modeling and vulnerability. And eventually, if the employee feels safe enough or they feel like they need extra support, they'll ask for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that you were talking about is the leader's action with their team.
Sure.
But, you know, often organizations still, like, what are the leaders' resources? Like, what are the one of the questions I was curious about is, and especially in the work that you do with organizations, as DEI is being cut, you know, well-being and investment in well-being is being cut. And we talked about tell the story and use the data and all of these things to convince leaders to do the right thing. But what are the resources to that leader who are now asking to be a little bit more vulnerable, right? Share their context, to set some boundaries for themselves and also for their team. What are some resources that also can help the leader invest, but also at the same time, how can the leader advocate for more resources? I'm stacking my questions, but you get where I'm going.
Right. Essentially, you're asking, how does the leader help themselves in order to help others? Like, oftentimes leaders are the first to not take care of themselves or manage their mental health, so that it's all bottled up and then they're not able to show up for other people. It's difficult.
Especially when an organization is cutting this.
I would like to think if a leader is in that role, that they have the agency and influence to say, I need this. It comes down to why they're not asking for it. Because budgets may be cut, right? For example, a lot of companies are doing that. However, if you are a leader in a particular area and you have your peers, or if you're connected to the CFO, the CEO, CTO, whatever the case may be, I would like to think that your role and position automatically give you an edge over your average intern, analyst, associate. But the question really is why they're not asking. It may be individual stigma, right? Depending on who you are, where you are, how you identify. Maybe internalized stigma of seeking support is just not in your vocabulary. It may just not come naturally to you.
Right.
Secondly, it just may feel that even if you do ask for the support, the culture of the organization is less focused on the well-being of folks. It's more focused on the bottom line. So there might be two reasons, right? It might be internalized, or they just may feel that it's not going to go anywhere. So that's how they're not asking for help. But let's think positively. Let's think that they can raise their hand and they can ask for support, and the culture is there as long as someone advocates for what they need. It's important to bring people like me in. I'm not just amplifying myself. There are a lot of other organizations, a lot of other great experts and strategists but rather than trying to figure everything out yourselves and managing the business and trying to manage your team, it's not plausible. You know, you're taking too much on your plate and you're expecting the world to change overnight. And then when it doesn't, you get disgruntled and you don't want to invest in it anymore. What a lot of people don't realize is that this work is not an overnight thing. It takes years to really embed culture in a positive way. And it takes multiple pillars to create this ecosystem. And that in itself is work. So if you want to take on added work, then sure. But if you can't, then you need to find others who can do this.
Dean?
So we know that part of an employee assistance program, even though there's not typically a large engagement with that in organizations, we know whether it's short-term counseling or digital solutions, there's still things that organizations want to offer to their people. Bhavik, what role do you see these tools playing in helping, being a resource for leaders to use for their folk, or to, make sure that they're really integrated in a nice way, that it doesn't feel contrived, doesn't overwhelm their team, it really makes a difference?
Yeah, it's a great question. Wellness apps in general cannot be successful as a standalone solution when it comes down to the well-being and mental health of employees. And that's that's where I'll start. It's not going to create sustainable work cultures. It's not going to change human behavior if you just present the app to your people and expect people to just magically be better, and it cures burnout, etc.
It feels a little bit like a check in the box exercise, if you ask me.
Very much check in the box, and they're not cheap. I remember when I was in finance, I introduced a mental health app, and it was costly. It's a pretty penny, but the reason why I did it was I implemented this program and let the culture simmer for a little bit. Mm-hmm. I wanted to make sure leaders started feeling a little bit more empowered to share their story, create new practices and norms within their teams. And there was a culture of openness and psychological safety. And then I added this app with the fundamental truth of that a lot of people will still not raise their hand, and they'll still have internalized stigma when it comes to advocating for their own mental health needs. And that's perfectly fine. But what I don't want leaders or organizations to do, and I'm seeing this more and more now, is that these mental health tech companies have introduced their product and they're flashy, and some of them even have AI now, and it's all virtual, all this fancy jazz, I like to say. And a lot of it is great, but it's not going to magically cure burnout, for example, or make people feel that they can actually show up at the workplace in a very authentic way. And there's another problem to this, is that when we think about different identities and their mental health, everyone experiences mental health very differently, and the socialization to mental health has been different. So, for example, in the South Asian community, we never talked about mental health growing up. We didn't even have a phrase for it. So I wasn't able to articulate my anxiety and my depression when I was an adolescent. And that obviously then impacts you as an adult. So when we have organizations giving these apps and, it's like sleep and meditate and do yoga, that's not going to actually fix a lot of things. And a lot of marginalized folks don't need that. They need community. Mm-hmm. They need to be rewarded for their work. So many people in these marginalized communities don't get the performance management they were expecting, or they don't get promoted, and there's no succession planning. How many folks who have left corporate and started their own businesses because they just feel that the capitalist structure is not for them? So the problem is that these standalone apps won't work, but they do have benefits. What I would suggest and encourage organizations to do is adopt these apps, but then follow up with human interaction. Mm-hmm. So if there are areas within the app that are specifically dedicated to the workforce, which a lot of these apps are now embedding, like manager training or leadership worksheets and resources, then have a facilitator use those resources and then embed that into practices. Like, how are we using these apps during high moments of stress? It's like we're all, on a Saturday and we're trying to use these apps to learn a little bit more about our mental health. But when we really need to take care of it at the workplace is those pressure times, whether that's quarter ends, year ends. Accountants always have those stressful times between now, like October to April. How are they managing their mental health on a day-to-day basis with deadlines and pressures from clients and internal targets to meet while having these technology apps? I would love to see the utilization rates for those companies who are burning out, because even though these wellness apps, I think the market now will be about $80 billion by 2030, 1 in 2 people are still burning out in the workforce. So the math is not actually calculating properly, right? Or as the younger kids say, the math is not mathing.
and it kind of goes to this whole thing of like when organizations roll out their benefits. They roll them out. Here's your list. Here's the website, all the things. And, it's like this one-time event, and it's like a special month that we're going to talk about, all the things you should be thinking about. And there's something about a constant message and a constant sort of promotion of safety. Or, a leader saying, I've been using these apps. And by the way, this is not in the spirit of using the app. It's really around making it comfortable to reach out for these resources when you need them. I've actually had an HR leader say to me, well, we have EAP. So I don't know. And it's around all the time. So I don't know. An HR leader, I don't know why people aren't using it. Right. Well, it's, when you're under stress and when you're in a moment of something, you're not thinking, oh, where is that EAP 800 number or the app, right? So how do we make it sort of a day-to-day, whether it's an app or anything, just comfortable with reaching out for help?
Yeah. I was just about to say, I've also worked with companies who don't even know where their EAP number is.
Right.
There's login information, the username and password, the company password, whatever, and employees are struggling to find it. So there's a lack of communication and transparency in terms of the benefits, right? And that's something that's probably a whole separate issue. But to ensure that these benefits are working and there's an actual return on investment,
yes,
you have to go back to the foundation. I know I sound like a broken record, but people will not trust you if your actions do not match your words, because you become uncredible instantly. Employees are very smart. They're aware. They're looking at every single micro action. They're not going to remember the social events or the Christmas parties. They will remember how they feel every day waking up, or how you make them feel on a day-to-day basis. So if you're not setting that example for them or advocating for them in certain areas where they're not present, then they will not trust you. For example, a lot of issues that come up for mental health for many communities is that they're not getting the rewards and recognitions they deserve. They're stuck in this middle management space. Obviously, this is a huge issue across the globe that many people of color are not in those C-suite positions.
Right.
Why? It's not because they're not competent. It's because they find deep discomfort in conforming to a certain extent. So many people just this year have left C-suite positions. They were asked to do things that are against their values and their morals and just their general practices. That, of course, impacts you on a mental health perspective. So if they're seeing that example on and on and on again, how are you expecting an app to fix all of that?
How are you helping organizations fix that? You just laid out something pretty significant there.
I use what I like to call, and what I branded as, a collective approach. One thing that people often mistake this work to be in is they want to do it in a vacuum. Either it's just HR, which HR just has 1,000 things to do. And it's not anything against HR, but HR is also not equipped to do a lot of the mental health issues. I've been in these positions where HR folks are really competent, but they've broken down and they've teared up and they're tired. They're mentally exhausted with all the work that they have to do on a day-to-day basis. And then the business constantly comes and says, I need more recruitment on this side, or I need benefits to look like this, or the LMS is not working, et cetera, et cetera. The list goes on. And it just is just really, really tiring. So what I do is I encourage one or two leaders who understand the why. You're not going to get every single leader on board, and that is just the reality of this work. But there will always be a handful who understand how mental health is important, how it's impacted them personally, and they want to leave that positive legacy that I was talking about. They're trying their best, and they're just somehow it's not integrating well with their capacity and their role as a whole. Then you want to get people who are in that middle management role where they're a little bit sandwiched in. They have the pressures of leadership team, but they're also senior enough to lead their own teams. And that is where we're seeing a lot of the pressure for folks. We need to hear from them. How are they coping not only with their own mental health, but how to show up for others? That's where I have struggled repeatedly in financial services, because you feel added pressure when you have both responsibilities. And then you need to get them, some of the other folks who are not maybe new, they have different perspectives. They don't necessarily have, a lot of tenure in the company, but they have experience, they have valuable insights. And you get that group together and you start collectively thinking about what are some of those pragmatic and practical things that we need to do. It's a concept called pragmatic empathy, that we want to show up for folks. We want to ensure that we're providing the resources, and we still live and work in a capitalistic structure, and we need to get our work done. Not only for ourselves, but for the people that we support.
Yep.
So many of them are parents, caregivers, giving back to their communities. It's important that they have this roadmap set up for them too. So everyone knows what we're achieving for. And get those people in a group, you work out some pragmatic things, you decide on one or two things, and then you pilot it and you understand how this will impact their worlds, come back with feedback, you see where things need to shift, and work like that in a very agile way, rather than just saying, we're going to do X, we're not going to look at it for a year, only 3 people will touch this, maybe some communications will come out. It's just fragmented. Come back in a very strategic way, and in an empathetic way.
There's a lot of data that actually says the middle manager, the one that's managing individual contributors team leaders who are managing individual contributors, that's the biggest opportunity in an organization, because that layer, impacts culture, sets the agenda for all of the folks who are actually doing a lot of the work, right? 100%. And to your point, they're having to deal and manage up with the most senior leaders of the organization. So I agree with you. I think the biggest opportunity is that slice, if you wanted to just figure out where to start, because they're the ones that are also modeling the behavior.
Right.
They're staying all late hours or leaving early. They don't necessarily communicate as well. They probably are struggling with mental health, but not saying anything about it. So therefore, they set the agenda for everybody below them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So this has been, first of all, I love this topic, and I know that we can go forever talking about it. But we've hit some really good points, and I loved where we started, which is really about leaders looking at themselves, figuring out what they need, and then what they can notice about the people that they work with very closely. We've talked about resources that they can take advantage of that may or may not be available to them. We've talked about digital resources. In your opinion, Bhavik and Dean, what haven't we talked about, which would be really important to share? And you can say nothing for this particular point because we have 4 more podcasts in this series. But what's coming to mind that you wish we had addressed in this session?
Dean, I'll throw it to you first. I've been doing a lot of the talking.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I will answer that. I just want to say to Bhavik, I'm really enjoying. And thanks for that summary there, Allison. But I'm really enjoying what you've shared here, because I think, how Allison and I have come into this podcast, our mission here is to speak to individual leaders. And much of what we've been talking about today is really about what organizations can do. So how can an individual leader influence? And I hear you spoke very powerful about, creating this critical mass amongst others, because I know there are leaders listening who care very deeply for their people.
Yeah. I'll build on that point, because that is an important point, that many leaders, including myself, at one point believed that I did not have the power and influence and agency to make tangible change. There are days still that I think this is too much of a bigger beast, right? It's larger than life, and I'm this one person in this ethos of trying to make change. And what I have learned and have learned from others is that that's not true. You do have the power to make a difference and change, whether that is minor or whether that's a holistic change across an organization. I am in the firm belief that small changes do make a larger impact. It's just with consistency. So if you're a leader out there, maybe you're part of a team, maybe you're not part of a team. Think about those small actionable steps that you can take immediately and where you would like to go. It may not happen with the current organization that you're in, but you can still advocate for change because you have the position to do so. Think about all those people who are working with you and are people managers or new associates or interns. They're not going to have the same level of agency that you do.
That's right.
So rather than self-doubting or rather than thinking, I don't know where to start somewhere. Because that's going to create a positive and cascading impact throughout the organization. People will recognize you as a leader in this space, not just a leader in your own world, whether you're a CFO or you're the chief, the CEO. You're a leader in the mental health space, and then ultimately you will advocate for others, and they will see that and they will feel that, and that in itself is something that you can't capture in a data point.
So in the spirit of sort of bringing us to a close, and again, there's 4 more parts to this series, and you're going to hear a lot, and we're excited about everything that's going to be discussed. Bhavik, we'll start with you. What are you most excited about for the remaining of this year, or even our upcoming next year? And I would love if you can give people a way to get in touch with you.
Sure. I'm excited about just keeping the torch lit. I know right now we are in very trying times. And I feel like every year there's something else, but right now in this moment, there's a lot happening across the world, and individually, there are a lot of things happening in the workforce as well. So I hope to be that beacon of hope, even if it's just my immediate circle of people. And how I manage that is I make sure I set myself with healthy boundaries, and I take care of myself mentally, and I practice what I preach a lot. So I can do that, but I'm excited to do that for other people. And so hopefully they can do the same within their communities. And I would love to stay in touch. You can reach me. My website is pretty much my name, bhavikrshah.com. It's very consistent with the theme of using my identity as my superpower. So yes, please feel free to connect with me. Let's have a chat. Let's see how I can support you and your organization, or even more than that. So I'm just really happy and thankful to be a part of this.
Dean?
Oh my goodness, do I have to tell you something I'm excited about?
You can be excited about, or you can just be something that's sort of top of mind for you. Any statement that you want
just
to.
Being facetious. You need to warn me if you need me to be, excited here, Allison. No, I think where I'm excited is certainly in starting this series about our mental health in the workplace, and Bhavik, for you to have kicked us off so sincerely and powerfully. Thank you. I think I'm excited about seeing the connections between some of our other podcasts, Allison, as we move forward through this. Even as we were chatting today, I was thinking about last week we did our episode on active listening. That's a really powerful way and a shift in a mindset in how we might make sure we're creating psychological safety or paying attention to the well-being of our people. We've done a podcast on micromanagement, making sure you don't do that naughty behavior. That's also, a way how inadvertently you may be having a bad impact on people's well-being because you're showing up in a way that's micromanaging and unhelpful. So I like making those connections and seeing how, even though we come at topics fairly in a fairly focused way, this is really all about rewiring our leadership, and I can't wait to do more of it with you, Allison, with you, Bhavik, as our guest in this series. So thank you. Allison, how about you? Are you excited? I need some excitement here.
I maybe excitement's too strong a word, but I really kind of like it, because I do think the thing that's coming to mind for me is, I love being around people who get it, how leadership and well-being and, being yourself and living into your who you are is important. And even as I say that, I know there's so much I don't know. And what I love about this podcast, and I love about this conversation, and I love, the work that we're going to do together, Bhavik, even though technically you don't know what it is and I don't know what it is. I just feel like we're going to do work together. We're going to make it safe for people, for leaders to just be themselves. And I'd love to sort of set some kind of aspiration for ourselves that, if we're having this conversation a year from now, how do we want to know that or feel that we sort of had some impact on the space and the world, especially as it relates to leaders and well-being and mental health. I think the thing that gets me excited, but also frustrates me is that we aren't further along post-COVID.
Yeah.
And there was no better time to learn about all this except during that time. And what's it going to take another COVID in order for us to actually get it? And that's the part that's sort of frustrating, but yet that's the opportunity, isn't it? And so that's what I'm excited about. Every single time I get around really smart people, I realize that we've progressed. There are solutions, and yet there's still more to do. And I feel like that gives us a bigger platform to continue to stand on top of and shout from, that we as leaders have to do better, and we have to take care of ourselves before we can do that. So as always, you can follow us on, everywhere. We will have this posted on YouTube, Spotify. We are on Amazon now. We are also on Apple Podcasts as well. And, we want you to subscribe. We want you to, give us your feedback. We want you to give us your comments, ask us questions, let us know what resources you want. We're building this community of leaders together. And we are not doing that on the back of the people on this call. We're doing it within the community itself. So we just want to thank you so much for listening. Ask the questions. Let us know if we need to connect you to Bhavik, we will. And we just want to thank you so much. And so keep being amazing. Keep leaning into bettering yourselves. And we'll see you on the next podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Thank you, Bhavik.